The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
It's being referred to as an historic labor shortage across multiple sectors across the country. Canada's banking on immigration to solve it. Tonight, what's needed to make that work for employers, newcomers, and the economy. Then, why protest and sporting events such as the World Cup don't seem to play well together. It's Monday, December 5th, and that's ahead on the agenda. Hundreds of thousands of jobs went unfilled this year as the unemployment rate flirted with record lows before settling in just north of 5%. Such tightness in the labor market is not new, and neither is the Government of Canada's go-to solution: boosting immigration. This time, the target is almost 1.5 million newcomers in 3 years. To find out what's needed to make that a success, let's welcome, in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Rebecca Young, Vice President, Head of Inclusion and Resilience Economics at Scotiabank. And back here in our studio, Dennis Darby, President, CEO of CME, Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters. Rupalim Bhuyan, Associate Professor of Social Work at the University of Toronto and member of the Rights of Non-Status Women Network. And Lev Abramovich is here. He's an immigration lawyer at Abramovich and Chern. And we are delighted to welcome you three here to our studio. And Rebecca, good to have you on the program again from Points Beyond. Just to get everybody up to scratch here on what we're talking about, we're going to bring up just some graphics here to put some background on the record. So if I could ask our director, Sheldon Osmond, to bring up this graphic, we'll get underway. The federal government wants to see 1.45 million new permanent residents in Canada over the next 3 years, including 500,000 in 2025. And the highlights of the plan go as follows: a long-term focus on economic growth with just over 60% of admissions in the so-called economic class by 2025, using new features in the express entry system to welcome newcomers with the required skills and qualifications in sectors facing acute labor shortages. We're talking healthcare, manufacturing, building trades, and the STEM fields, that's science, technology, engineering, and math. And then increases in regional programs to address targeted local labor market needs through the Provincial Nominee Program, the Atlantic Immigration Program, and the Rural and Northern Immigration Pilot. Okay, that's some of the background. Rebecca, come on in here and get us started. Is more immigration to help our labor shortages in key areas, is that the way to go in your view?
I think the short answer is absolutely yes. Just to put a few more numbers on the table, we've got a labor force of 20 million. 1 in 5 is approaching retirement age. So if you keep in context, we're talking about 1.4 million over 3 years. That's really going to help, but it's not going to be enough. So I think net positive, and I look forward to getting into the details around those positives.
And we shall do so. Dennis, let me ask you about your organization, which has responded thus to the new immigration target. The plan's objectives are still insufficient to meet the country's significant workforce needs, particularly in manufacturing. Why did you come to that conclusion?
Well, the conclusion is we've had a chronic shortage of labor for the last decade. It is the #1 issue of all manufacturers across Canada. And even today, as we sit here, even in the area that people keep talking about, maybe we have a recession, not the case in manufacturing. We're about 100,000 positions short today. So we think there needs to be more, and you need to continue to push that, push the pedal to the floor to bring more people into Canada, because our workforce especially looks an awful lot like me, regrettably. They're graying, and they're near the end of their career, and that is a real concern.
I think you look pretty good.
Well, given the good thing I don't work at a manufacturing plant.
Okay, give us just a sense. You say 100,000 jobs short right now?
Yes.
In what kinds of fields?
So skilled trades particularly, and general labor. In Ontario particularly, it's skilled trades, but in areas like Quebec, around Montreal, they can't find general labor. In fact, manufacturers are going to great lengths to try to find ways to get people into plants.
Okay, Rupalim, over to you now. Do we have, it's one thing to invite a lot of people to come to our country, 1.5 million over the next 3 years is a lot of people. Do we have the right structures, the right supports, the right everything in place to welcome that number of people when they come here?
Yeah, I think those are great questions. And as we learned throughout the pandemic, the world of work is not inseparable from people's housing, people's healthcare, and the safety nets to support those workers. And unfortunately, we have fallen short. When we think about jobs, we need to not only employ people and bring people in through immigration, but also make sure they're decent jobs. And across the economy, we don't yet have equitable pay. We have a disproportionate income for women, for people who are racialized. These problems need to be addressed along with filling the labor shortages. We also need to make sure that people can take time off if they're sick, and they need to make sure that they can care for their families. So we need both the federal government, perhaps through immigration, but also working in tandem with provincial and regional governments to make sure there's decent work, and that the immigrants who are brought into Canada or have an opportunity to work here are given status. It's really hard to support your family, to reunite with your family, to make sure that your healthcare needs are met, to access basic needs if you do fall ill, if you have a precarious status. So we need status for all immigrants on arrival, ideally, as well as decent work and decent jobs.
That is, if I may say, a rather enormous wish list, a lengthy list of agenda items that need satisfying there. How close do you think we are to accomplishing what needs doing?
I think that these are possible. I think that when people work collaboratively, especially having people at the table who are directly impacted by this, we'll have creative solutions. I think if we're only looking at the labor and the economy from the eyes of those who benefit the most, unfortunately those with the capital, then we'll probably have solutions that meet short-term needs, but at the cost of our Canadian society. And a big reason people come to Canada is because of the promise of having a fair and equitable society, and I think we need to work together for this.
Is there anything, Dennis, on that list that you object to?
Of course not. In fact, I know, give you examples of manufacturers who've had to do exactly that because our system isn't so well positioned. So we talk about manufacturers out west, especially who will have language classes, who bring the community together, because often manufacturing plants are not in the big cities downtown. They tend to be in the smaller towns in the suburbs. And so manufacturers do oftentimes have to put their own systems in place or develop that network so that when the people do come, when the families do come, they are able to have some level of integration. Language classes, I was at a plant called Lone Windows out in Manitoba, and they have Ukrainian immigrants, and they have language classes 5 days a week to help bring the folks up to speed, because they know how to read the computers and they know how to look at the numbers on the plant, but in terms of general conversation, they're trying to move them ahead. It's stuff we have to think about.
Lev, let me get you into this discussion, because I pointed out at the beginning that this new plan has some significant regional aspects to it. And I wonder how significant you think that is to the overall potential success of what we're trying to do here.
I think it's a step in the right direction. I don't think it's nearly enough.
The 1.5 million?
No, I think in terms of the regional programs, okay. I don't think they're enough. I think provinces should be given greater powers to fill labor needs, but also to build communities, societies, and to actually achieve their objectives, as opposed to having the federal government take in a lot of immigrants who ultimately then settle in a few places like Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver.
So how would you fix it?
So I think it's a step in the right direction, but we do need to increase provincial quotas. We also need to cut red tape, frankly, because a lot of our immigrants are coming from the labor force. They come in as temporary foreign workers, and that term in itself is a bit misleading, because quite often to become a permanent resident, you start as a temporary foreign worker, and employers are facing a lot of red tape in being able to bring workers in and being able to ultimately take care of them, because that red tape sometimes takes away from other programs.
What's
right?
the red tape? What are you talking about?
Well, for example, to hire a temporary foreign worker, let's say in manufacture, the employer has to fill in like a 16-page form, advertise for the position in a very specific way, provide a bunch of financial documents, go through compliance audits and so on, just to bring in a worker.
It's too much.
When, for example, there's a recognized labor shortage. I was recently speaking to a client whose employer tried to do that on their own. It's a small tool and die shop, I don't remember, I think it's in Hanover, Ontario. And essentially they got rejected because the paperwork was so complicated. They had to hire a lawyer and go through that. I'm an immigration lawyer. I'm mostly on the immigration litigation refugee side. But frankly, a lot of this stuff companies should be able to achieve without lawyers. So cut red tape, give provinces more power to welcome immigrants and to sort of meet targets. And also make sure that the system is equitable, so people are not waiting for 6 months to 12 months for a work permit, so that families are not waiting for years for permanent residency, because that ultimately takes away from their ability to integrate. They're not sure whether they're going to stay or whether they're going to have to go back. So a step in the right direction, but more needs to be done.
Let me get all of you to weigh in on, let me put it this way. I can imagine there are people watching us or listening to us right now who are saying, this is a great deal of effort being undertaken to bring new people who are not yet here to our country, and it takes the government's eye off the ball of trying to do a better job for those people who are already here. I can imagine that view being expressed. Rebecca, can you weigh in on that and tell me whether you think that is an acceptable view to hold in this case?
Well, I think I would, maybe caveat it a little bit, is that what these very ambitious immigration targets are showing us, they're exacerbating some of the challenges that exist. So they're not related necessarily to newcomers coming to the country as much as, structural challenges we've had as a country. And I'll just point to 3 examples that, I would argue speaks that we need a more holistic approach beyond just immigration. But one, we have very weak productivity. And that really, we've basically been growing on labor. So we need, better incentives to invest in capital and invest more in people as well. So that is independent of whether we're bringing more Canadians into the country or not, or more newcomers. A second big problem that we have is that we have, we have growing gaps in our infrastructure, our social infrastructure, health, education. And so again, that is something that, a growing population is going to exacerbate, but those exist, or those exist regardless of whether we bring in more Canadians. And the third challenge, I would say, is around housing supply. We all know what's gone on in housing markets. And so I would say, growing our population, while in the long term it's a net positive, the numbers alone will exacerbate these pre-existing challenges. So I think we do, that does beg the question of, yes, very ambitious targets can be good in the long run, but you need to figure out kind of those milestones along the way to make sure that it's not a bumpy road that actually could lead to backlash and lead to Canadians asking that very question that you suggest.
Okay, let me put those ideas to Rupalim. You've heard these 3 reasons why we might want to think about. I hope I'm not putting words in Rebecca's mouth here, but we might want to be careful about $1.5 million.
Right.
In the long run, it might be great, but in the short run, it's potentially problematic. Should that give us pause?
Well, I think the Canadian economy does rely on increasing labor availability to support productivity and to fuel different parts of the economy. When I think about Canada, its position in the world, it is a global actor in many ways, not only because 1 in 5 Canadians arrived here from another country. Myself, I came from the United States. My parents came from India. But also because our economy actually benefits from the resources from around the world. Like over 70% of Canada's wealth comes from extracting resources. So we can't think of ourselves in isolation from this global economy. The wealth that Canada does have, as well as the people living it, are interconnected, which is why I think focusing on only the targets as through the economic program is short-sighted. People need to have a fair society, a robust society, being able to reunify with family members. Many people coming into Canada today are not granted permanent residence. The vast majority actually are coming in as international students, as temporary foreign workers, some humanitarian refugee populations. Many of those folks have to wait 5 to 10 years before they can get permanent residence, especially if they don't qualify on the very stringent requirements for permanent residence through express entry, for example. So in order for us to have a just society, and I think Canadians take this for granted. We think of Canada as a space, as a haven for these ideas of rights, of democracy. We really need to wrestle with the institutions we have, whether it be housing and income and childcare. So immigration can be part of that influx, bringing new ideas, as long as people are treated fairly, and also in respect for all the communities here, working with economic recovery, both for the racialized, the gendered minority populations, the indigenous populations. These need to happen in tandem. And I know it sounds complex, but I think we can do it.
Out of curiosity, you came from the States? Whereabouts?
I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri.
And why'd you come to Canada?
That's a good question. I think at the time I was looking for a job.
You got one?
And ironically, the university was hiring someone looking at global issues in social work. and that was what I was doing. So here I am, and I study immigration. So it has been a great place to live and study immigration. It's also, unfortunately, an important place because of the growing inequality. And I don't mean to say that I want the inequality, but it has been an interesting place to see how the two come together. Incredible opportunities and wealth in Canada, and also growing inequality. And this is something I think we could do better.
Interesting. Lev, your view on that issue of whether we ought to focus more on those who are here already as opposed to thinking about bringing more people in?
Well, a couple of points, and Rupaleen, I think, mentioned an important aspect of this. It's not that just the PR targets, the permanent residency targets, but Canada welcomes around 500,000 students a year. Many of those students are sold a dream, frankly, by consultants abroad. You'll study in Canada, you'll have an opportunity to immigrate, and so on. That reality is not there, and Canadian universities are using those students, in fact, as somewhat of a cash cow.
Cash cows, for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And those students are living in sometimes in pretty poor conditions, working 2 jobs and so on, and at the same time they need housing.
Do most stay or go back home?
Well, most, unfortunately, under the current system, do go back home, and we should have a conversation about the number of international students. Is that sustainable? Are they benefiting? Is Canada benefiting? And is this a short-term solution? People work for a year or 2 and then go back, right? So, and more needs to be done in educating students in terms of, here's the reality, right? You may not be able to transition. This is how much housing costs and so on. The other thing is foreign workers. They do face significant challenges in transitioning. And I think there should be a separation between those who already work in Canada and those who are coming from abroad as permanent residents. Like, the streams shouldn't be all a part of express entry, in my view. If you worked in Canada for a couple of years, you have a job offer, it shouldn't be that difficult to transition. We shouldn't have a sort of a permanent temporary class, if you will, especially in so-called low-skilled occupations where people are really struggling to transition, right? So I think we should have a broader conversation about how many people are coming in, what is available in terms of housing. Are people being appraised of how expensive it is to live in Canada? Because I can tell you the minimum income requirements that IRCC sets, in my view, are way too low for the reality on the ground. And in speaking to immigrants, I find that there's a lot of frustration, and because there's a sort of a disconnect between, waiting for 2 years, finally coming here, and all of a sudden you have to drive an Uber because you can't afford to look for a job immediately, and so on. So I think we need to have a broader conversation, and I think that is something that I think has been missing. We're focused just on the numbers, but we're not focused on sort of what are those numbers achieving, what we can do better, international students, temporary foreign workers, and so on. The numbers in and of themselves don't tell the whole picture.
Dennis, can I get you on that original question?
Yes, I think, first of all, these are all really important points, because you think about it, if we bring a student from another country and train them at one of our community colleges to be a mechanical or electrical tech, and we know they have jobs, the jobs are waiting for them, our sector is short, about 2/3 of all the shortages in our sector are in those areas. If they can stay, we make it easy for them to stay, then Canada benefits. Because, remember, 90% of what we produce in Canada goes to the U.S. So the majority of our GDP comes from our trade with U.S., and most of it, as you said, are manufactured goods or resources that are upgraded. So we need to make sure that these folks, first of all, their credentials are recognized when they come in from outside. That's a Canadian problem we have anyway, because we don't even recognize credentials province to province. But they need to be recognized when they get here. We need to make it easy for them to transition. If you've got a job, if an employer is willing to sponsor you for a job, we need to make that has to count. And if you're gone through a community college or university and you're qualified and you have a job offer, that should count as well. So exactly, we have to have places for them to live. In fact, one of the sad things I've learned about in the last couple of years is companies saying, I really can't expand because there's not enough housing in the town. And until the housing catches up, we're gonna keep turning down work. Similarly, we've heard of the companies saying we want to adopt new technologies, as our colleague said in Halifax, but I don't have the people that can even run the machines, so I'm just going to wait. And so I think there is an urgency. The numbers are urgent, but also making sure that we have the infrastructure that supports, because we need these workers. It's the next generation, especially now, not put too fine a point on it, as we do this transition from to a low carbon, high electrification economy. We need all the smart people and all the hardworking people we can get to get through that transition. Today, at the current rate, we're falling behind.
Rebecca, when we, in Dennis's words, have to wait because we don't have adequate housing, or the employer just doesn't see the circumstances in the field that would allow him or her to add more people, more employees. What does that cost Canada, in your view?
Well, essentially, that is costing us growth. If you think GDP very simplistically is the number of hours worked times the labor productivity of those workers. So it really is meaning that we are stifling our own growth. So these sectors can't produce more to meet demand that's out there. And we know from various surveys, including the Bank of Canada, that over 60% of businesses, even now in the slowdown, are saying that labor is their biggest constraint to growth, consistent with what Dennis is saying in manufacturing. So it is fairly broad-based across all sectors, and that was pre-pandemic as well. So it's been exacerbated, but even the slowdown isn't going to kind of erode that challenge. It's structural, and it's going to be there as we look out to the future. So I think that does kind of speak to the imperative that if we really want to, grow our economy and grow our prosperity, we do need to look at how can we integrate newcomers and integrate those that are here already. Building on some of the points my colleagues made, we have to be sure not just to focus on the ones arriving, kind of the new targets, that we know that 2/3 of newcomers have university degrees, but only 1/3 of them are actually working in positions that require them. And that's well below for a Canadian born. So lots of challenges that we need to overcome to make that transition, as others are saying. But I would say, back to my earlier point, that it's not the panacea to Canada's growth challenge and to our economic well-being. It is going to help if we can get it right, but we still need, all these other factors, all these other challenges in the economy to address, and we may need to be more selective. So, we may need to think about, if we have limited capacity of newcomers, where is the best place for them and for the economy?
Lev, if you're immigrating to Canada and you don't have a job offer, how difficult is it to enter and or adapt to our society here?
Well, I'm an immigration lawyer, so I can just share anecdotal sort of evidence in speaking to my clients. I think it has become, over the last, I would say, 20 years, increasingly more difficult. The world is becoming more globalized and at the same time more complex. Technical skills are quite specialized sort of in Canada in terms of industries. So I think it is becoming a lot more difficult to enter the labor market, especially if you're potentially immigrating from a country with perhaps slightly different educational standards or even employment standards. And it also depends on the sector. I think in manufacturing, for example, in construction, it's fairly easy to integrate. In the financial services, it's going to be more difficult because maybe employers are hesitant in hiring you, maybe not enough is being done to train newcomers and to help them with resume drafting, cover letters, and so on. But I think it is becoming increasingly difficult, and we can see that in Toronto. If you ever order an Uber, it's quite likely that the person who is driving you is a recent immigrant. If you order food, again, a recent immigrant may be a student. Now, it's fine for us to have a transitionary period, but when that transitionary period becomes permanent, i.e. somebody just comes here, they work in finance, let's say in India, and they just drive an Uber, then our immigration system is failing and it's not doing a good job. So from my perspective, it's becoming more difficult.
What's a reasonable amount of time in that kind of a transitionary job?
I'm not a labor economist. I would imagine that if somebody is in that job for more than a year, then perhaps there are concerns. I mean, I've immigrated twice. My wife's, family also immigrated. There was transitionary period, cleaning, driving, pizzas, etc. All those things happen. But as long as you're not stuck in that position, or at least as long as you can't see yourself ever getting out of sort of the Uber business, for example. So I think one thing that we may want to do, back to Rebecca's point, is to perhaps be more selective, because it's not really fair to the immigrant whose expectations are not being met. And it doesn't do much for a labor market to have this mismatch between your degree and your actual occupation in Canada.
Can I put that to you? Is it a good idea for us to be more selective, as Lev describes it?
You know, I feel like this conversation is missing some of the important facets that we know is also true of Canada. So when we think about GDP, when we think about integration, we're kind of sidestepping away from the ongoing systemic racism and inequality that is part of what people are being integrated into. So what I would love to see is real conversations about the kinds of inequalities that affect people's ability to find work, to find decent work, to find work that allows them to pay for their families and to pay for housing.
Give an example of what you're talking about.
Well, I work with the South Asian Women Rights Organization in the east side of Toronto, and they do incredible work reaching out to mostly immigrant women from Bangladesh and other countries from South Asia, many of whom arrived with permanent residence. And they continually face income inequality because the kinds of jobs that are available are low paid, they're precarious, they're mostly contracted through temp agencies. So they might get a call from the agency telling them to show up, they transport themselves an hour, but then when they arrive, the job doesn't exist anymore, they don't need them, even though they had to put together some resources to take care of a child for them to go to this job. This is where the jobs are today. This type of precarious employment doesn't allow for sick time or leave. People were not eligible for EI benefits or the Canada Emergency Relief Benefit during the pandemic. And this is where a lot of the jobs in Canada's economy are growing. So we need to have a real comprehensive look at what kind of employment are we offering to people, what kind of safety nets are for them as well.
All right, let me do another follow-up with you. During the worst of COVID, Canada prioritized permanent residency applications from refugee claimants working in Canada's healthcare sector. Would extending this to other vulnerable groups who don't work in healthcare help bridge some of the labor shortages that we have been talking about here, in your view?
Well, I think when we look at there's no doubt those working in the healthcare center were at the forefront of putting themselves at risk and taking care of our public health and our everyday needs. Everyone's family members were at risk of contracting COVID. But we also needed people to drive the food, to bring it to our houses. We needed people to pick the food, the agricultural workers, many of whom are on seasonal agricultural temporary visas, and they're not allowed to live with their families in Canada. They're not allowed to stay permanently in Canada. So when we think about extending permanent residence, it should be for all people working in Canada. The domestic worker movement in Canada for many years, led by domestic workers, had said if they're good enough to work, they're good enough to stay. And I think we need to think about our Canadian values. If we believe that people working here should have the same rights, that we should extend it to everyone, those working in healthcare, but as well as manufacturing, the Uber drivers bringing our food to our house out of convenience, as well as those in manufacturing at all levels.
Okay, let me put a follow-up to Rebecca, which is you've talked about the need for what you call, I think, a workplace passport for newcomers. What is that and how would that work?
Well, to your earlier question to Lev, like realistically, how long should a good transition be? I think 5 years max, in the sense when somebody hits the ground, it should be a joint passport held between the individual, the employer, and the government, whereby, where do you want to be in 5 years? What sort of training and integration do you need to get there? And point being also that I think employers need to bear some of the responsibility in this transition. So if we're going to have limited numbers of newcomers, and I say limited using that 1.4 over 3 years, that is small relative to the gaps out there. We should look at the employers also that are willing to invest in those individuals. So I think we need to, come up with this kind of shared accountability to really get newcomers even before they're here. And it may be in, helping with mobility across the country, because this was a point earlier that was raised that, that the cost of living varies vastly across the country, and between city centers, over half of newcomers go to 3 cities alone. So we should be looking at over 5 years, how can you get these new Canadians settled and, living up to their full potential, and enabling them through tools and training to, to really enhance their own financial security.
Okay, with just a few minutes left here, Dennis, let's try this. One concrete policy solution you'd like to see the provincial government bring in, apropos of the numbers the feds have put on the table, the provincial government bring in to help facilitate all of this?
Well, I was going to say, one of the things my colleague said earlier, we need to have a stronger role for the provincial governments in terms of setting the priorities and setting the rules, and not forcing, encouraging employers, and employers I know in our sector will, to really be part of owning those folks. Not when they're here, before they get here, as a trusted employer, as a way to ensure that they are integrated, that we have programs in place, and we recognize their credentials. The idea In Ontario in particular, our industrial infrastructure grew on immigrants. My parents and their parents, and many others, and they did that in a time when it really it wasn't very difficult because people came from all over the world to Ontario. Now it's more complicated. Manufacturing is located sometimes in big cities, sometimes in small cities. We really have to look at it province by province. It's not the same.
You're going to give me a policy prescription, though?
So I think what the Ontario government needs to do is we need to use the money the federal government provides. They provide a lot of money for training and integration. Use that money to really target industries where they say we really need to bring people here and we want to encourage companies to do it, because I think it could make a real difference here. It can make a real difference in every province. But look at Ontario. We can't just talk about how many people we want. We have to say how we're going to integrate them, and we'll be at the table.
Last minute, same question to you.
Cut the red tape when it comes to bringing in foreign workers, and then allow those foreign workers to transition to permanent residency via truly streamlined paths. It shouldn't be that difficult, and people should not be stuck in this temporary status without hope, without the opportunity to transition, and that is ultimately hurting our society and our economy.
Oh, what percentage would you say of your clients end up giving up here and going back to where they started?
I would say a very low amount. I can't personally name one off the top of my head, but I also have a very sort of specialized litigation-driven practice, immigration litigation-driven practice. I think across the board, however, just because people are not giving up and going back doesn't mean that things are working.
Doesn't mean it's working out, right. I want to thank everybody for participating in this discussion tonight on TVO. Rebecca Young from Scotiabank in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Rupaling Boyan, Associate Professor, Social Work, University of Toronto. Lev Abramovich from Abramovich and Chern, the law firm, immigration lawyer. Dennis Darby, CME, Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Even before the World Cup got underway, soccer's governing body, known as FIFA, signaled that protest wasn't really welcome. Teams, for instance, were not allowed to wear rainbow armbands to protest the host country's treatment of the LGBTQ community. But resistance to such social justice actions goes further than FIFA. From the Olympics to the NFL and beyond, protest and sport have a rocky relationship. With us now for more, in Nottingham, United Kingdom, Gabriel Notfail, postdoctoral scholar of masculinity studies at the University of Calgary's Workland School of Education. In Edmonton, Alberta, Tarika Tandon, communications consultant at the online resource and networking hub Sport and Dev. And in Ajax, Ontario, Morgan Campbell, sports journalist and senior contributor to CBC Sports. And we're delighted to have the three of you with us tonight here on TVO for a very timely conversation about what is going on overseas. And Gabriel, let me put you to work right away on this. There have been attempts at some activism in the World Cup so far. England, for example, got a yellow card for daring to wear the One Love armbands. Why does FIFA seem to dislike political activism as much as they do?
Yeah, I mean, I guess to point out first, it's not specific to FIFA regulations. This is a problem across all of sports, really, particularly like higher levels of sports. You mentioned the Olympics earlier. You know, the Olympic Charter has rules in it that prohibits political actions by Olympic athletes. But as you say, FIFA has really doubled down on a lot of the punitive measures for athletes and for teams that have wanted to speak out at this World Cup on the rights of migrant workers, LGBTQ plus rights, women's rights. And it really makes the priorities of FIFA clear, I think, that making money and growing political influence are kind of the primary concerns, and that's why there is such a sort of crackdown on the potential for political actions by teams and players. And unless there is a big shift in that culture, a big shift in those priorities, then FIFA and similar sporting organizations will ultimately be incompatible, I think, with political activism.
Tarika, let me follow up with you on that. And we have heard, actually, probably ever since Qatar got the rights to host the World Cup, we've heard lots of organizations criticize them for their human rights records and their labor abuse. I think they've, what's the expression I've seen? Qatar World Cup of shame. is the expression that Amnesty International has used. Do you think Qatar deserves this much criticism?
I think there is a space for criticism, but I think it should be evenly given out. We had the World Cup before this in Russia, and there was enough criticism then as well. And the next World Cup is going to be in the US, Canada, and Mexico. And given what has been happening in the US recently, especially with their crackdown on trans rights and women's rights, especially in terms of abortion, are we really going to see the same sort of reaction there or not? That we will see. But I guess what I'm saying is we need to have a certain level of reaction continuing. So if there is this crackdown on Qatar for their human rights abuses, then this should continue on, and we shouldn't stop.
So just so I'm clear, you don't think Qatar should be the singular focus of all the criticism, that it's got to go beyond that. Is that right?
Definitely.
Okay, gotcha. Let me quote something here from the Washington Post. And Sheldon, maybe you could bring this graphic up and everybody at home who's watching can read along. Qatar is by far the smallest country ever to host the World Cup, says the Washington Post. And many critics have denounced the country's treatment of migrant workers, its attitude to same-sex relationships, and what looks like a brazen attempt to launder its image via the beautiful game. But one popular charge, corruption, is more complicated. Whatever Qatar did or did not do to secure the right to host the World Cup, any charges of corruption also implicate FIFA, the Fédération Internationale de Football Association, soccer's global governing body. Okay, Morgan, pick up the story if you would. Do you think FIFA has corrupted the World Cup?
Do I think FIFA has corrupted the World Cup? Now, I'm not a FIFA scholar or a World Cup scholar, but I think what you're seeing in a lot of these global sports events that are very expensive to stage is these events wind up in the countries that are willing to blow billions and billions of dollars to host them, which is how, the Winter Olympics wind up in China, where there was not enough natural snow and they had to use like a year's worth of water to make all this fake snow to put on ski slopes. And here we have Qatar that somehow has got this World Cup, even though there are only 300,000 like permanent residents in the country. Everyone else is in and out of the country. And because you've had to move this World Cup from the summertime to the late fall, early winter, because it is too hot to play soccer in the summertime in Qatar. And so it does make you wonder what rules people were playing by to get this tournament in this country in this year at this time of year.
Does anybody, Morgan, dispute the fact, Gabriel, does anybody dispute the fact that at this stage of the game, I mean, it's kind of well known that there was a lot of chicanery involved to get Qatar the World Cup, right? That's beyond dispute at this point, isn't it?
Seemingly, yeah. There's been plenty written about it, and documentaries on Netflix that also cover the topic. So it does seem that way, yeah.
Is anybody perturbed about this?
About the corruption?
Yeah.
I'm sure, people are very perturbed that it can lead to, hosting rights being given to countries that do have such poor human rights kind of records. So definitely people are perturbed about it. But I do think, similar to what Tarika said, that it is bigger than Qatar's human rights record. Sport itself, particularly when we look at men's soccer, when we're looking at FIFA, has a poor record itself around issues of LGBTQ plus inclusion and women's rights. So it's important that the criticisms of Qatar aren't just limited to this year's host nation or this year's World Cup, but used as a springboard, I think, to recognise the kind of prejudices and discriminations that also exist in the sport itself.
Tarika, do you think, there's a school of thought that says, look, this is supposed to be sport. It's supposed to be diversion. It's supposed to take people's minds away from their everyday problems and just give them something enjoyable to watch. And people who want to constantly bring sort of political concerns to the table, they're not really welcome to do so. How prevalent do you think that view is?
I think it's about split with what people believe if there should be a sort of mix between sport and politics. But I think it's a false sort of view to have. Athletes are not just athletes; they're full humans. They have many dimensions, and they do have opinions and thoughts about these issues as people existing in this world. So to assume that just because they're athletes that they won't comment on things like this is, I think, a ridiculous sort of assumption to have. So yeah, I think this bifurcation is quite false. It's been imposed from on top, but I think a lot of athletes are beginning to push back against it.
Morgan, what about that? Is it desirable to have a situation where people just enjoy sports without any concerns about the additional political stories that have been emerging from the World Cup, for example?
I mean, as Tarka just said, every single person in every event, they all come from somewhere. So to imagine that all these players were born and developed in these laboratories with no connection to the outside world or to any of the issues that underpin everyday life, or the issues that underpin like how these events wind up where they wind up. Yeah, it's a fallacy, and it's unrealistic. Now, I think what you're getting at is the difference between this fall and winter, I almost said summer, but this fall and winter at the World Cup, and say 2 years ago in the NBA and the NHL when they had the summer seasons because of the pandemic, and it was also the summer of George Floyd, and before every game there was some type of nod towards Black Lives Matter. The players would take a knee, they would sing, lift every voice and sing, and what people thought was protest essentially became part of the presentation. And why aren't we seeing that in the World Cup? And a lot of it is that one, the summer of 2020 was not the norm. It was a big exception. And two, if a demonstration is within the rules, if the rule makers sanction this demonstration, then it's not a protest. It's just a demonstration, right? So when the NHL would say to Matt Dumba, take a microphone, say something about systemic racism being bad, beautiful moment, but it's not a protest. And there's a big difference between what Matt Dumba did and what John Carlos and Tommy Smith did. And so I think the summer of George Floyd kind of got us conditioned to seeing big sports leagues making these type of social statements part of the show. And now that we're back to business as usual, basically, with the Olympics and FIFA, and it's not part of and it's not only not part of the show, but it's frowned upon. It seems a little bit jarring when really all we've done is return to what has always been.
Well, Gabriel, that's what I'm wondering. I mean, is it possible to watch a soccer game between the United States and Iran and truly, genuinely only see soccer? Or is it inevitable, in fact, even desirable, to understand all of the, geopolitical externalities that are also at play there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, sport in general always reflects the cultural conversations of the time and the place, and the political conversations of the time and the place. And that doesn't, for me, detract from the importance of sport or the enjoyment of sport or what sport means. If anything, it adds to its significance and adds to its, its intrigue, right? So accepting that it's political shouldn't take away from the sport itself or the enjoyment of sport. It just does mean that we can't shy away from those political questions in sports.
Well, Tarka, let me follow up with you on that. There are myriad issues around the world today to care about. I mean, there are National Hockey League players who are from Russia originally who have all at some point had to deal, no doubt, in post-game interviews about what do you think of the war in Ukraine. When Iran participates in international matches, they have to answer for what's going on there right now, and on and on and on. How do we determine what social justice issues are appropriate to really put to athletes during the course of competition and which are not?
I mean, I don't know if it's up to us, really. Again, as athletes are full people, there are things that are going to matter to them a bit more than they will matter to us. We all have our own, preferences, I guess, in terms of what social justice issues matter. So I don't know if it's really up to us to decide that agenda. And yeah, a lot of athletes are bringing the agenda to the table themselves. They're the ones who are talking about it. They're the ones who are, especially in the age of social media, they have this direct connection with the audience. So they are directly telling their fans what they think about certain issues. So I think it's a matter of kind of figuring out what is personal to them, and then perhaps discussing that more with them.
No, I take your point, but Morgan, sometimes the players themselves, the athletes themselves, want to bring the issues forward. Other times, they are on the receiving end of questions from media. For example, there was a lot of speculation the other day when Iran played in the World Cup. Were the athletes really singing the national anthem, or were they just mouthing the words as a means of protest against what's going on there in Iran? I guess the question is, how much do the players, do the athletes, how accountable do they need to be for what's going on in their own home countries?
I'm not sure how to answer that question.
Yeah.
Would you ask Shai Gilgeous-Alexander about how he would have ended the Freedom Convoy in Ottawa because he's from Canada? Hey, Lube Next Dort, what's your take on the Greenbelt in Ontario? How responsible should you be, right? Corey Joseph for Rod Phillips being on vacation when he should have been with his constituents. The connection can be tenuous unless you already know that person is involved in it.
Well, all right, let's make it a little more direct. Is it fair ball to ask Alex Ovechkin of the Washington Capitals why he's got a picture of Vladimir Putin on his Instagram account, and therefore
because he has a picture of Vladimir Putin on his Instagram account, which is very different from saying from asking how a third-string defender on Iran's World Cup team, how responsible should that person be for the government cracking down on protesters, right? Those are two very different things. If I have, and a lot of Russian athletes have these pictures with Putin in the same way that Tom Brady had the MAGA hat in his locker. And if you were doing that, especially in view of journalists, yes, then it's fair game, which is very different from fishing, right? Because what you're describing is sort of a fishing expedition, and you throw the line out there like bait and see who bites it, which is very different. But if a person has put themselves out there and said, yeah, I'm going to pose with Vladimir Putin, I'm going to break bread with Vladimir Putin, I'm going to break bread, thumbs up with Donald Trump, that's something different. Of course, that's fair game.
Tarka, can I get you to follow up on that? How much do the athletes, how accountable do they need to be to whatever's going on in their home countries? And as Morgan points out, is it fair to sort of tag them with whatever government policies are happening?
I think it depends on what kind of policies. Again, as Morgan said, if we're going into specifics, they perhaps don't have much of a say in it. But if we're talking about bigger things like having a picture with Vladimir Putin, that's going to be something they are accountable to. Again, we all take actions as humans. We all have our opinions, and we are also accountable to it. I mean, in my own workplace, if I show up with Nazi paraphernalia, I will be questioned about it. So I think that's fair game even for them. They are workers, even if they're athletes, and they are responsible and accountable to, I guess, a bunch of stakeholders, but they still are.
Gotcha. Gabriel, you have written about the relationship between men's sports and homophobia, and I just want to quote an excerpt here from an article you co-wrote for The Conversation titled World Cup 2022, Men's Soccer Must Stop Silencing Activism and Allyship. Here comes the quote. Those players who are open about their sexuality are rightly praised for the courage. But the fact that such courage is required for LGBTQ plus players only further confirm the entrenched norms in men's soccer which marginalize men who do not live up to homophobic, transphobic, and misogynistic expectations. Conventional codes of manhood and boyhood have permeated sporting spaces, making them exclusionary and not spaces for all to play. Okay, tell us why you think it's difficult to promote allyship in men's sports.
Well, I mean, there's clearly something unique about the culture in men's sport that does often make the players and the teams and the organizations noticeably silent on issues of social justice, particularly LGBTQ plus rights and women's rights. And, if we take soccer as the example, like globally, there's such a lack of open and visible LGBTQ plus players in the men's professional game. So it shows that men's soccer is not typically a safe space for LGBTQ plus people, and it excludes them, or those that are participating don't feel able or willing to be open about their sexual or gender identities. And historically, men's sport has been a highly masculinized space that has often been quite fraught with homophobia, transphobia, misogyny. And although in contemporary context that's been challenged to a certain extent, we still see, for example, through the lack of openly LGBTQ plus players, that it's clearly still an issue, right? And it's not just homophobia, but also sexism and misogyny is also wrapped up in the sport still. Researchers in the UK found that domestic abuse rates rise nearly 50% when the England's men's soccer team, football team, are playing World Cup or European Championship matches. So evidently, men's soccer is intertwined with and in many ways complicit in these practices of homophobia, transphobia, and misogyny. And so that being the case, it's sort of unsurprising, although still very disappointing, that men's soccer has failed to act on issues of LGBTQ rights and women's rights violations at this year's World Cup, when this is an issue, an ongoing issue within men's sport itself, and men's soccer is a kind of prime example of that.
Morgan, do you think fans would just prefer politics-free games? Not have to think or worry about any of this?
No, because political storylines get built into the stories we tell about sports all the time. Like here in Canada, 50 years ago, they had the Summit Series. My family, I wasn't even born. My parents had come to Canada, but this is like growing up, you get beat over the head with Summit Series celebrations. And it's not just because Canada beat Russia. It's because Canada beat Russia at the Summit Series in the midst of the Cold War, and Canada is kind of this stand-in for the United States. It's the same when Americans celebrate the Miracle on Ice. It wasn't just that they won the gold medal in hockey, it's that they beat the Soviet Union for the gold medal in hockey. So depending on what the politics are, who's telling the story, who the audience is, and who winds up winning, these storylines are often very welcome in mainstream professional international sports.
Okay. Tarika, your work involves developing activism in grassroots sports. Tell us just a little bit about what you do and why you think it's important.
So what work I do is exploring the connection between sport and development outcomes. So we work not towards developing a sport itself, but how can sport be a mechanism through which we can achieve development outcomes, especially like the Sustainable Development Goals. I think there's a lot of space we can look at how activism is being sort of supported in grassroots sport. So if you look at sport and development as a field, they're using sport to kind of challenge all of these pressing issues, including misogyny, including homophobia, including access to education. So while we're looking at elite sport right now, we can also see that grassroots sport has been doing this for a long time as well. And we're kind of influencing change within the youth, within different generations, but we're doing that at the grassroots level, at a level where there's impact as well.
And Morgan, let me go to the other end of the spectrum, which is away from grassroots, and that is the biggest, most expensive sports leagues in the world. I wonder whether you see, well, let me back up a second. The way the NFL has handled controversy, you talked about it earlier, taking the knee for the national anthem, that kind of thing, and so much anger surrounding that among so many fans, versus how, let's say, the NBA and the NHL have handled some issues around race relations, which have been a lot better. Do you see a day coming when you think the NFL will more embrace the potential social justice role it can play, as opposed to have so many people angry about whenever something like that happens?
Sort of, but they're all businesses, and they're all doing what they perceive is good for business at the time. So if it's good for business at the time, like when Colin Kaepernick came along and started sitting out the national anthem, and then more players started sitting out the national anthem, and there was some backlash from fans, was some backlash from Donald Trump, who was running for president, and then the following year when he became president, yes, it was kind of incumbent upon the NFL to decide how they wanted to trigger the fewest number of fans and then placate the loud, angry, racist fans. But then again, you saw after George Floyd, you saw the NFL paint end racism in its end zones. And you saw NFL players put Black Lives Matter, end racism decals on their helmets. And so all of this, from the perspective of leagues, they're all businesses, and they are all doing, for the most part, what is best for business. So then I don't attribute like a greater moral motivation to almost anything that comes from the league, because I understand they're trying to please their audience. So if it comes to the point where the pendulum swings again, and any of these leagues, including the NHL, including the NBA, perceives that either the audience or the rich people and organizations that want to buy their teams are less progressive socially, they'll please those guys too. None of these organizations are necessarily in this to help the little guy and the little girl come up in the world. They're not. They're there to make money.
On that somewhat pessimistic note, I'm afraid that's our time. Thanks to Morgan Campbell and Gabriel Notfail and Tarek Tandon for joining us here on TVO tonight. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And that is the agenda for Monday, December 5th, 2022. As big producers such as Netflix and Disney face economic turbulence, tomorrow we'll ask, is the golden age of streaming behind us? I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.